There it is. All right, folks. Well, welcome everybody. I'm Melissa Rosenberg. I'm the director of the Howard County Autism Society. We have a huge group today, so obviously this challenging behaviors topic is very popular, and I want to, we co-present this series of workshops every year with folks from Pathfinders for Autism, so I do want to give a shout out and thank them for being involved in this workshop today. So, and everybody should be on mute, but if you're not, I'm going to try to mute. Again, we have a huge group. We have over 200 people signed up. So please try to keep yourself on mute. We're going to use the chat for questions as we go along. And we do have a poll. We just want to see kind of where you all are, where your interest is in this topic. So I'm going to attempt, this is my first attempt at a poll. We're all learning this new technology. So I'm going to open the first poll and see if you all can see it. Let's see if you're able to see my screen. Let's see.
It came up in my chat. So
came up in your chat. Okay.
It's like on the chat side, there's like a polling thing.
You're voting. Thank you. You can tell us what best describes you if you're a parent, teacher, educator, family member, not a parent, medical professional, or other. So we're getting lots of parents, lots of no answer. Some teachers, educators out there. Super. I'm excited this is working. This will help Kathy sort of gauge her talk too as we go along. So this is great. Super. We'll just give it another minute and then we have two other little quick questions to ask you. So far we have 43% parents, 13% educators, 4% other family members, 5% medical professionals, 14% other, and 25% no answer. So I'm going to close that poll.
Yeah, well, it imprints it inside.
And let's go to the next one.
So many comprehensions.
Give me 10 more seconds. Awesome. Okay. So yeah, we do have the majority of parents on the line today. All right, let's go to the next question. Poll 2. Hold on, sorry guys. Technology. Okay. This should be the second poll. It keeps wanting to replace the first poll. All right. I'm going to try one more time and then we'll just scrap it. New poll. Poll 2. Okay, the age of the child, if you're a parent or a family member. So we're going to open that poll. There it goes. Help Kathy sort of gauge the talk, how old your child is, or if you're an educator, what age range, you know, basically you're interested in discussing, or if you don't have a priority, that's fine too. Couple more minutes. If you can indicate the age of your child, if you're a parent or family member, or if you're an educator, what age mostly you're interested in. We have a few more minutes here on the poll. Looks like we're getting a lot of folks 15 and over, and also the 4 to 5 range. We have about another minute to go. Okay. All right, I'm going to get ready and close the poll. So it's all pretty close. Looks like higher percentages in the older 12 to 14, 15 up, and then no answer also had a pretty high percentage there, Kathy. I'm going to close this one. Oh. No. Okay, and the final question, poll 3. What do you hope to learn from the presentation today? And just give us some idea that, again, will help Kathy as she does her talk. And just a reminder, please, to mute yourself if you could. We have a big group on today. We want to be able to hear everything Kathy says. A lot of people responding how to reduce challenging behaviors in my child. Also, how to understand why my child has, and I apologize for the typo, how to understand why my child has the behaviors. Also, how to set my child up for success, also rating very high. I'll give it a little bit more time and then we'll close that out and get started. But definitely how to reduce challenging behaviors is way ahead.
That makes sense given the topic.
It really does. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. Thank you guys for voting, and I'm excited that we know how to do the polls now, so we can use those in the future. And it'll close it out in 7 seconds. All right, great. Thank you so much. All right. So I just want to take a moment to introduce Cathy Judkins. Cathy is a BCBA, LBA, Clinical Coordinator at Verbal Beginnings. She's a board-certified behavior analyst since 2006. She has worked with children and adults with disabilities in a variety of environments, including home, public school, and private school residential placements. She has extensive experience conducting functional assessments and developing behavior plans for children and young adults with autism and related disabilities. She trains families and staff to implement behavioral programming to decrease maladaptive behaviors and teach replacement alternative behaviors. Verbal Beginning since October 2018 as a senior BCBA in the role of a clinical coordinator. When she's not analyzing behavioral data, she enjoys spending time with her husband and sons and coaching soccer. So welcome, Cathy. Thank you so much. And just one more reminder, folks, to please put yourself on mute. I'll try to monitor that as well. I will mute you if you've forgotten, but thank you. All right, Cathy, she's gonna share her presentation now.
Let me find my screen. Okay. So, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Okay. So, we're going to talk a little bit about just ABCs of challenging behavior. I kind of planned this topic before the current pandemic. So I tried to, based on some feedback, asked to I'm going to try and address and sort of build in sort of what we can do now, given that I'm a working mom and I've got 2 boys running around. And so I trying to do online learning. We're all trying to work and stay sane. So kind of what can we do now to really like use a lot of these strategies to really, increase everyone's quality of life, decrease the stress. Kind of what can we do during this time? So again, we'll take the questions via chat. Melissa, feel free to interrupt me if I miss a chat, because I think when I shared the screen, I lost the chat, but
I'll be happy to read them to you. Yeah.
great. So again, I did try to put a lot of specific examples in here to really like give you guys things you can walk away with today versus, like having to talk to someone else. Like, I want to give you real life, like I can try this tonight type examples. So as Melissa mentioned, I do work at Verbal Beginnings based out of Columbia. I do in-home services. Before that, I lived in Massachusetts. I worked at a residential private school up there. I started out as a BCBA living in Seattle, but I'm actually originally from Arlington, Virginia. So I've kind of come full circle in my long, many years here. So kind of already talked about that. So again, we're going to talk about, like, I want to be able to address a couple different objectives with you. I will also be giving specific time, I think, some breaks at the end of each sort of section for questions. And so we can kind of go through this, but I want to be able to talk about the 3-term contingency for behaviors, the 4 functions of behavior. I really want to focus a lot on proactive strategies you can use right now, a lot of antecedent management, reactive strategies, again, as those sometimes might be needed. And then I'm going to pepper in a little bit about how we can use these strategies now, specifically knowing that we're all under an increased amount of stress. Things are different, and we don't know when that's going to be normal again. So the ABCs of behavior. When we talk about the ABCs of behavior, and this can be a challenging behavior or an appropriate behavior, we're kind of focusing on those challenging behaviors today. What we talk about are the ABCs, so an antecedent, a behavior, and a consequence. So an antecedent is what occurs what's happening right before the behavior occurs. The behavior is what that child does. And again, when I say child in this case, it's anyone. I mean, we have behaviors, we engage in behaviors all the time. I'm going to kind of use child again, sort of loosely as the individual we're working with. So it could be young adult or adult child, adult participant. Consequences then what occurs immediately following that target behavior. The behavior, we're looking at what's happening right afterwards. And we're going to get into a little bit of all these pieces. The antecedent, the A, can be a direction from an adult. Sit down. It could be being told no. It could be having something removed or that it doesn't work anymore. I know a lot of times the iPad dies, the battery dies, the internet goes out. That is an antecedent. It could be a presence of an object. So I see a cookie on the counter. It could be presented with a non-preferred item. So I'm given like broccoli or peas. That is an antecedent. And it can be internal as well, hunger or like a headache. So those are all antecedents to behaviors. They're things that in our environment that trigger or occasion that behavior to occur. So really thinking a lot about antecedents is very important, and we'll get a little bit more as we talk about why it's important to look for those and kind of how we can manipulate the environment to minimize the probability of challenging behaviors from occurring. Behavior is something that is observable. It's an action that's observable. So sitting down, and these are kind of tied to the previous examples, asking for a cookie, throwing the peas, hitting your head against the wall, or dropping to the floor. So those are all behaviors that a child might engage in. And again, they're not necessarily all maladaptive or problem behaviors. Sorry if you can hear my son in the background. Or they could be problem behaviors or adaptive behaviors. And then finally, the last piece of the 3-term contingency is the consequence. So this is what's happening in the environment right after the behavior occurs. So again, and these could be both, and we'll talk more about these a lot, but it could be something that's like socially mediated, or it could be kind of an internal piece as well. So again, it could be given the cookie or an iPad. So that's the consequence to the behavior. I'm told to stop that, or no, don't do that. That's also a consequence. Potentially an item is removed or no longer presented. Attention being removed is also a consequence. Or being told, good job, you did it, nice work. Those are consequences as well. The 13th. So consequences are events that increase or decrease the probability of that behavior occurring again. I'm not trying to get too jargony, but when we look at behaviors and behavior analysis, the consequence, which we'll talk about in a second, that's really what's going to increase or decrease that behavior is going to happen again. But it's important to know. So consequences can be classified as reinforcers or punishers. So reinforcers are things that happen after the behavior that's going to increase the probability that behavior will occur again. So if something functions as a reinforcer for a child or an adult, then I'll probably do that again. And we'll get a little bit more into what that looks like in the function when we talk about different functions of behavior. But pretty much the easiest way to think about that is, I'm hungry, I ask for a cookie, I get a cookie. And so then in the future, I'm more likely to ask for a cookie if I'm hungry because I got a cookie and that behavior was reinforced. Punishers are decrease the probability that a behavior will occur. So again, something like, I'm hungry, I scream and cry, mom does not give me a cookie, then I'm less likely to engage in that behavior. Or mom yells no, so the next time I ask, something like that. Again, a little bit of behavior analysis jargony stuff, but again, when we say positive or negative regarding reinforcers and punishers, we're not talking about good or bad. We're talking about adding something or removing something. So positive reinforcement is when I'm adding something to the environment. I'm saying I'm adding either attention or an activity, an edible. And negative reinforcement is if I'm removing something. And we're going to get into that more as we talk about specific functions of behavior. Same thing with punishment. I can add a punisher. I can add a verbal reprimand, or I can take something away. So like taking away attention or taking away access to the iPad. So that's sort of like the nuts and bolts when you talk about the ABCs and looking at the 3-term contingency of behaviors. Is there any questions there, Melissa?
We have a couple questions. Yes. About how to help my child understand how his behaviors impact others and the way they feel. And you may get to this later. And also how to redirect obsessive behaviors now. Those are the two ones. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah.
Pardon me. My daughter is 40 and the young adults I work with are in the 20 to 30 year range. So if you have some tips for adults, Kathy, we might consider those two. Thanks for your questions, everybody. Keep putting them in the chat.
Okay, great. So yeah, again, this is pretty, sort of the foundation when we think about behavior and both teaching appropriate behaviors as well as, decreasing negative or maladaptive behavior. So now we're going to move on to the functions of behavior. So this kind of gets into why that behavior is occurring, the reason for the behavior occurring. So what we think about is we need to look at what the consequences that's maintaining that behavior. What's happening after your child engages in a tantrum? What's happening after your child hits their head? That is then, what are they accessing or removing that is then increasing the probability that behavior will continue? And we need to know the function of the behavior so that our interventions are effective. Because if we think something's happening for one reason, but it's happening for a different reason, my intervention, my treatment, my plan won't be effective. Sort of like treating a viral cold with an antibiotic. It's just not going to work. So you need to treat the reason. So there are 4 functions of behavior. We use the acronym EATS to remember those functions. So there's escape, attention, tangible, and sensory or automatic behavior, automatically reinforced behavior. So we're going to get a little bit into each of these. And I think these are super important because as you look at different behaviors and kind of what's happening before them and after them, that's going to really help you understand why your child is engaging in a behavior and what we can do to intervene and to decrease the probability that's going to happen. So EATS, escape. This is when you, the behavior, when the child engages in the behavior, it is to remove a non-preferred or an aversive activity or event. So, escape might look like getting out of a work or a task, avoiding social interaction, leaving an unpleasant location. So an escape maintained behavior may look like when I am presented with a math worksheet, I crumble it up and throw it across the table, and then there's no more work. That's a pretty easy way of showing like an escape maintained behavior. Avoiding social interaction might be if I am taken to a birthday party that I do not want to be at. I start engaging in, I start hitting my head. So mom takes me out to the car and I can avoid interacting with those people. Something similar might be for an unpleasant location. You take me to school, I engage in dropping and aggression, and then mom calls and I get to go home, or mom gets called and I get to go home. So those are sort of when you look at escape maintained behaviors. Something like throwing the peas or the broccoli. That might be also another escape from a non-preferred activity. Okay. Attention. This is a big one. So this is access to social interaction. So when we think about behaviors that are maintained by attention, it's access to that social interaction. So it could be physical interaction. I might get tickles if I ask for tickles, or I lift my arm up. So that behavior is maintained by attention. It could be being told nice job, attention as well. A lot of the times we see challenging behaviors that we may engage in something like there was a chat about the presentation. I think it was sent out earlier, and I'm sure you'll also get that as a PDF afterwards.
I don't know that it got sent out, but it will be sending to everybody who registered. Absolutely.
Perfect. I just saw that pop up on my screen.
And we will post it on our website as well.
Great. Okay. Sorry. So the other thing that comes up a lot of times with attention is sometimes people engage in challenging behaviors that are attention maintained. And we think, or we as sometimes may think that saying, don't do that, stop, that's bad, that annoys me, those are sort of that verbal admonishment or a reprimand may actually be serving as a reinforcer to that child or individual. So to them, they may not perceive that as negative or as bad attention. They just think of it as that's someone paying attention to me and interacting to me. So they may not necessarily care that you're saying something that we may think is going to be punishing. They just are getting some sort of attention or social interaction. So a lot of times you may see kids that engage, that maybe they're alone or not, they're not getting any attention. So they they jump up on their desk and start dancing around. All the other kids laugh at them. The teacher says, get down, don't do that. That's an attention maintained behavior. So even though getting sent to the principal or all those things, like they're still getting tons of attention when prior no one was paying attention to them, no one was talking to them. So that's a form of like an attention maintained behavior. Okay. Next would be tantrums. So these are activities or items, also edibles. So I may engage in challenging behaviors to access an item, activity, or tangible. So, maybe I ask for the iPad, mom says no, then I drop to the floor and start crying, mom gives me the iPad. Or I'm at the grocery store. We're leaving. I see the Snickers bars. I drop to the floor. Mom gives me a Snickers bar so she'll let me leave. It can also be a reinforcer for, appropriate behavior. Your child finishes their homework, they get to go to the trampoline park, or, they pass second grade, they get to go, to the trampoline park. So all those different things you can, again, there are access to tangibles that are going to reinforce or increase the probability of those behaviors continuing. And finally, we have sensory or automatically maintained behaviors. So in this case, the behavior itself is reinforcing. It's not socially mediated. There's nothing that is coming from another person that is going to make that behavior change. So it could be that something about the behavior adds a sensory stimuli or removes it. So again, a lot of our kids that we work with engage in hand flapping. So something like that might be adding some sort of sensory stimulation, a visual stimulation. Scratching an itch, you're getting rid of like an internal, that itch is going away when I scratch it. Head banging or banging your head. If you have a headache, then that may help, attenuate that pain for a certain amount of time. Kids may toe walk because they like how it feels, or kind of the whole body sensory sensation related to that. Taking Advil to get rid of a headache, that is automatically maintained. The headache is gone. So those are some examples of sensory or automatically maintained behaviors. Anyone have any questions about the functions of behavior?
Yeah, we have some questions in here. If you're going to get to it later, you can just let us know. Is it okay to deal with misbehaviors in front of a child's peers, specifically teens or even other adults?
Okay. I think that's a great question. And I think it's really going to depend on kind of the consequences that you're looking at implementing. If a client or a child, is socially aware, potentially, like if you're implementing any sort of like consequence type strategies that might embarrass them, it could negatively impact their social interactions with their peers, or embarrass them. Not a very behavioral term, but it's true. Depending again on their sort of awareness. However, if it's a safety concern or something that would be, needs to be addressed right away, I would definitely say you should address it in the moment. I think a lot of times, and I'll talk a lot more about this in the next set of slides, is the antecedent management. So anything you can do to prevent or kind of prepare the child so that those behaviors don't occur, I think should happen across all contexts. But I think that's a good question and something to think about that might be really more individualized. But I think, again, really thinking about that individual's dignity. And if I engage in some sort of like timeout, and especially if it's like a teen, like that's probably going to, impact their social standing and kind of how other kids may perceive them. So
we have another question, if I could. 4-year-old son biting worker when told to take a nap at daycare. What can I tell them to do to deter the behavior?
Oh, that's a good question. And we're going to be getting into a lot of antecedent stuff, as well as potentially some consequences. But it sounds like something like that, again, not knowing and not necessarily like having the clinical background there, but the antecedent management might be a big help for that.
Mm-hmm. And this sounds like a similar question. What are some suggestions for managing behaviors that are a result of avoiding non-preferred activity, such as participating in their distance learning activities, or as in the last question about the nap? So I guess we'll get to that a little bit.
Yes, definitely. But
okay.
Feel free to ask those again if I don't get to exactly what you want to hear, which you might, but feel free to type those again.
Yes.
And so really, I want to focus on antecedent management. What can we do to set up the environment for success? Because right now we're all super stressed. We're all, we're all struggling. And so I think what can we do now to really increase the likelihood that behaviors are going to not occur, to reduce those probabilities? And some of that, as we talk about, might be reducing demands. And that's going to be okay, especially right now. But again, I think really antecedent management in general should really be the go-to first thing, regardless. If I talk with any of my clients, the people I supervise, I'm always like, what antecedent management wise, what have we done before we go right into, and we also add reinforcement, but then before I go into any sort of like other consequences in the form of like a punishment or something like that, I really want to look at what are we doing to set that child up for success, versus just consequating things, and really thinking about antecedent management as teaching opportunities to teach the appropriate behaviors we want to see, versus just dwelling on like, how do we get rid of the bad ones? They're not going to engage in, we have to teach them the good behaviors to replace the bad ones. They're not just going to stop engaging in bad behaviors and have nothing to do. they're going to do something. So we're going to talk about interventions that are put in place to reduce the probability that those challenging behaviors will occur. We're going to we're going to alter the environment before that behavior occurs, so we're reducing that likelihood. And again, setting up for success so that the probability of appropriate behaviors is increasing. So one thing is simple. So like thinking about escape maintain behaviors or something like that, setting up and changing the environment so it's less likely the behavior will occur. So thinking about distance learning, if your child is avoiding working at the computer because it's in the playroom and all of his favorite toys are there, maybe having it set up in a less exciting room. So we come in here, we're going to do this, and then we're going to the other room. So there's less to like distract that child or elope to in that room. You have a door. Think about where you're positioning yourself, even in like normal times. If the child is running away from their desk to complete homework, you might, position yourself next to that child and between the child and the door. So there's just less of that opportunity. So maybe, again, something similar might be like if the child usually uses the iPad or the tablet for watching YouTube, you probably don't want to use that same tablet for homework. You probably want to use like a different tablet or a computer if you have access to that. So because that child thinks of that environment of that thing as their fun and leisure toy. So when then you change what the demand related to that, probably going to get some pushback. So something like that, it can be as simple as just setting up a room differently, putting things up high, moving things out of the way. If you have a child that likes to throw things and you probably don't, when they're upset, then you're going to be presenting something you don't want, probably setting up so there's less things to throw. This is a big one and kind of might be related to like the daycare example and also the online learning. Lots and lots of schedules and routines. Really setting up opportunities, like setting up new ones and adjusting them as we go, but following predictable routines. So, a non-COVID example, bedtime is always pajamas, brush your teeth, book, lights out. And that's the thing. And we always start that at 7:30 or 30 minutes after dinner. So setting up those routines so that it's expected. And then we'll talk a little bit about this, but if it's going to be different, if something's going to change, letting the child know, because if you've told me I'm going to do something and then you're like, oh, just kidding, we're doing this instead, I might be a little irked. So setting up routines. So something like at nap time, it might be like, the child knows like after lunch, we read a story, you make your cot, and then this is the expectation. And then you may actually build in like a reinforcer. So if you do this, get your cot out, lay down, take a nap or take a rest, and you have a safe body, then you can get a special snack during snack time. So setting up those contingencies, we'll get more into that. I tend to get all around in my slides, so I'm going to try and keep to them. But paired with that is a written or a visual schedule. So again, thinking about the daycare nap example or getting your child to, do their online learning, a written or schedule. So it could be just for the day or sort of the expectations for the day. I use it for my own son and he's in second grade and he's giving me a lot of pushback on not wanting to do the Zooms or how much homework do I have to do, and it's minimal assignments, but so I'll set up like a checklist of what he has to do, and as it goes, and then I'm giving him breaks. He does a work, he goes and plays video games, he comes back. So kind of having that routine and that expectation will help. It could be for the whole day. It could just be for like a 20-minute period. Again, outside of COVID, like here's the expectation, the written schedule for getting dressed, or a visual picture schedule for, the dinner time routine. So again, using those things, I like to say, like, it's harder, it's not impossible, but it is harder to argue with paper. And a kid is not necessarily going to get that same sort of interaction and that fighting and that sort of back and forth with paper. They may engage in property destruction and rip up the paper, but again, it's a little bit harder to argue with paper. And visuals can also be helpful as they're like a tangible and constant. So if I'm telling you something, it might be in one ear, not the other. But if it's there, you can always reference it. That child can also hold on to it, reference it. It's a reminder of what's coming next and kind of potentially what may be the reinforcer at the end of that task. So this is a big one. Kind of paired with the routines and the schedules is setting those clear contingencies and expectations. So again, going back to the two examples that were asked, the nap time, again, remind the child, like, this is the expectation, setting it ahead of time, reminding them. Some of this is going to be dependent upon your child's verbal language skills and things like that, but you can also pair these with visuals, written schedules, timers. Again, timers can be helpful. I know some kids get really upset with timers and stuff, but if you have a timer, okay, we're going to get ready for nap in 5 minutes, I'm going to set the timer. Or thinking about online learning, okay, the expectation is for each activity that your teacher assigned you complete, you can play for 10 minutes on the computer, and then you're going to come back and you have that written out. You have a timer set for the video games. Really setting those clear contingencies and expectations is going to help. And this could be something along the lines of, okay, eat a bite of broccoli, then you can eat a bite of the French fries. And so again, those are clear contingencies and expectations. See, I keep going. Here's some other ways of setting up, like contingencies, expectations, and this again might be helpful, just language. If you're giving a direction that you really want that child to follow through on, don't present it as a question. Give it as like it's not negotiable. So pick up the pencil, not, can you pick up the pencil when you have a second? And the child's like, no. It's really hard to follow through with that you presented it as a question. But if you really want that child to do something, then it should be pick up the pencil. This is an important one. Really focus on telling your child what to do, not what you don't want them to do. So it's use your inside voice, not don't whine, don't scream. Or it could be, put your dirty clothes in the laundry basket, not don't put your dirty clothes on the floor. Because you're just telling them what you don't want to see, but there's still 1,000 other things they could do instead. So it's much better to just tell them what you want them to do. And then using that first then language, similar to the example with the broccoli or the online learning, is first clean your room, then you can have a snack. First do your math worksheet, then you can have a break. So using those simple first then language.
Okay.
Let's see where I'm at. Another piece with the proactive strategies and the antecedent stuff is using a dense schedule of reinforcement. I think this is especially important now. Again, I'm not a psychologist. I'm a behavior analyst, but we're all stressed. We're all anxious. Our kids are just as stressed or anxious. They're just maybe not able to talk about it in the same way. And so many of the kids we work with and the kids that, that you guys have are love structure and love routine. And so being at home is like, and not being and having that school is hard, even if they're happy, or they may be like, yeah, I'm happy, no school. Like at some point, like, yeah, no, they're just, it's different and it's not okay. And so I think that's really hard right now. So as much as you can, and I remind myself of this every day, is giving a lot more praise, regularly. Even if it's just something like, I love that you're sitting there so nicely, or, can I have a hug, or just some sort of like appropriate praise, or just positive interactions, at least 2 or 3 times more, as often as you provide constructive feedback or, directives. One thing that we talk about a lot when we're teaching our younger learners is, a lot of times kids, when they learn, we're teaching responding to their name, like, look at me, or, Bob. And so even just be Bob and just like, I love you, or just like, come give me a hug, or, high five, not just like Bob. And then he's like, you're like, come do your homework, or come put this away, or, you made a mistake. So kind of also pairing their name and just with positive interactions. A lot, as much as when they do what you ask, provide praise, provide physical attention, if that is reinforcing. I know for some kids it's not. and being specific, not just like, good job, but I love that you picked up your room. It looks so nice. Thank you. That's really helpful. Really pinpointing the behavior that you want to continue. Again, some of this is dependent upon verbal behavior and kind of your child's repertoire, but again, that's a great way to model some language too. So again, really that specific stuff.
Kathy, we've got a lot of questions. So
Okay. You can go ahead and start asking and I can,
okay.
yeah, I have a couple more, but go ahead.
I'll do a couple and then we'll space it out. There's quite a few in here. So if a child is prompt to the potty and he has a tantrum, instead using his words, I guess she's asking, do you ignore him, put him in timeout, try to redirect him, and nothing works? 30 minutes later, he's still screaming and crying. Any other suggestions?
I think really, so thinking about that specifically, again, it sounds pretty specific, but I would definitely address it from a antecedent strategy. So was the child expecting it? Are they on a schedule? Does the child know it's coming, or were they interrupted? A lot of kids and anyone really is like, you got 5 minutes left on your show and someone's like, it's time to go. That's going to annoy me. I want to go out to dinner if I know, or wherever, or to the grocery store if I know that I only have 5 minutes left on my show. So being planful about how you're presenting demands can be really helpful. Knowing ahead of time, having them, if there's a timer paired with their potty schedule so that they know it's coming. So that might be helpful. That's going to potentially could prevent that chain of behaviors. Then I think, again, it depending on, it's going back to the function. So if you're prompting to potty and if a child is engaging in tantrum, and again, you kind of want to look at like, is it escape from the potty, or is it like access to whatever you took them away from? So if you took them away from YouTube to go potty, then they probably don't want to be in the potty. They'd rather be using YouTube. So that's a great reinforcer. So complete this and then you can have YouTube. Or if they don't want to be in the potty, then you again would want to consult with a behavior analyst, or you're sort of the person that's helping with your programming as far as, do you need to work on just tolerating going to potty? Is the potty an aversive situation? Is it too loud? Are there medical pieces? Are they constipated? I mean, there's a ton of, I'm actually doing a continuing education next month on potty training, so you guys get all that information. But those are all really important things to think about, but if depending upon the function is what you're going to do. So if they're trying to escape, really you're going to ignore the maladaptive behaviors and then maintain that expectation. And we'll get to that in the consequence strategies. Another sort of piece that I don't even touch on in this is teaching like a functional communicative response, teaching a way to appropriately ask to escape or more time. But again, it's going to depend on what's the function of that tantrum. Is it, again, to escape the potty? Is it to get whatever they want? There could be multiple reasons. So, sorry, that was a long answer.
That's all right. I'm going to combine the next one. So let me see. When kids can't communicate verbally too much, so there are two folks asking sort of similar questions. One has a child who's deaf with autism. But if a child is nonverbal and having trouble communicating, I guess the family's asking, just having trouble figuring out, the source of the behavior, the function, if the child understands the direction. Could you speak to that a little?
Sure, I think that's a great example. And I think, again, depending on the level or severity of your problem behavior, you may want to consult with a behavior analyst, just because, again, we can do based on observations, interviews, and also specific types of assessments and sort of that we'll use, we can help to determine the hypothesized function of those maladaptive behaviors. And it doesn't have to be verbal. We're not like asking people like, why are you doing that? Or necessarily even relating to demands. I do think, I think actually one of the next two slides is about like just understanding the demands and making sure that they're reasonable, but also knowing sometimes challenging behavior occurs because the child doesn't know what you're asking them to do, or they don't understand. So if they are not have less verbal skills, or potentially are deaf, have some sort of like other hearing piece like that, and then you're giving them verbal directions or not able to communicate, and they can't communicate with you, then that's where a lot of that breakdown is. I mean, really, a lot of what we talk about as behavior is communication. Appropriate behavior, maladaptive behavior. Our children are engaging in those maladaptive behaviors for a reason. They are engaging in that and to communicate to us something. Is it I want something, I don't want something, I hurt? Those are all possible reasons that a child may be engaging in those maladaptive behaviors. So I think really looking at, even if the child is nonverbal, looking at those antecedents, behaviors, and consequences, taking that data, writing down what's happening, to then look for that pattern of, okay, every time, it could be that maybe there's a sound that they hear that you don't hear, or they're really annoyed by the fluorescent lights. So whenever they go into a specific room in your house, they engage in problem behavior to escape from that particular light fixture. How some people, the bathroom, they have that weird buzzing sound or things like that. So that could be, but if they're nonverbal, they can't tell you that. So they may just be doing what's effective to get them out of that aversive situation. And so I think, again, you kind of have to look at those patterns and take that data in a way that's going to help you pick out what are those salient pieces, the salient antecedents and the salient consequences, to figure out like what's happening and why. Again, it's not necessarily because of, and I think some of the antecedent management strategies, a lot of them are more verbally based, but I do think simple visuals, a picture of getting dressed and a picture of McDonald's. A lot of apps you can get free or cheap for your phone that have like simple first then schedules. And I think paired with this is really like working with a speech therapist and a behavior analyst on building a functional communication system. So if it's picture exchange, if it's sign language, if it's vocal verbal, if it's an augmentative device, all of those things, working with the team so that your child can communicate. Because without those like ways of communication, they won't be able to get their needs met outside of engaging in those problem behaviors and us guessing or following through on that. So.
All right. Let's keep going, and then there's more questions. I'll try to kind of combine as we go.
Yeah. Perfect. Another thing is looking at just extra reinforcement. I kind of already adjusted this, but so if that your child tends to engage in problem behavior, to engage in attention or to access attention, screaming, for example, then you might just be giving them extra attention when they're not engaging in screaming, or whenever they are using appropriate vocalizations. Going back to something like the online learning piece, if a child engages in problem behaviors to escape from work or non-preferred tasks, as soon as they maybe come over and sit down and maybe just write their name, go take a break. What a great job. So it's like you're preemptively, like you're setting them up for success by like preempting the opportunity for that behavior to occur. So it's sort of like on a variable schedule, they may not predict it, but like if they come over the first time of the day and they just were not engaging in problem behavior, maybe just starting to look a little irked, but not engaging in lots of challenging behavior, maybe give them a break early. So you're essentially reinforcing the compliance versus reinforcing that whole chain of problem behaviors later on. And so kind of trying to get it in earlier and non-contingently. If the child's done really well all day, again, this comes to the next slide, is maybe it's like, you don't have to do this last one. I love that you were doing such a good job the rest of the day. We'll make this up later, or I'll tell your teacher you don't have to do this one. So kind of being just extra with your reinforcement. And the last sort of proactive antecedent management strategy is altering those task expectations, breaking the tasks up, planning more time for breaks, especially if problem behaviors are maintained by escape from tasks. So Maybe your child is in general ed, but they have an aide usually in class that maybe helps them do this. So if you're looking at math worksheets or a reading assignment with then they have to listen to the book and then they have to answer questions, maybe just have them listen to the book, then they get a break and then come back and do the questions. If it's a long book, maybe they listen to the first 4 minutes, come back and then listen to the rest. So thinking about planning those extra breaks, especially if those problem behaviors are maintained by escape from tasks, building in a lot of attention if they have attention maintained problem behavior so that they're getting constant attention when they are working, because otherwise they'll engage in problem behaviors to get you to come over. Lower the effort. If, again, the child doesn't like typing or writing, or it's just a lot, write it for them, type it for them. A lot of my son has the Google Classroom, and you can use the video, the voice to text, but right now I'm just typing for him because it just gets it. I make sure he gets it done. Chunk things into smaller, manageable parts. So again, like if they have a big project, and this is or something that they have a lot of parts to do, chunking it, doing smaller pieces, or if you want them to help you with dinner, it's not like let's make the salad. Maybe like at 2 o'clock, let's cut the cucumbers. At 3 o'clock, let's wash the lettuce. So you're kind of breaking it up into more manageable parts. One other thing to kind of be helpful is thinking about, and this kind of might be related to the potty transition or the nap transition, is sometimes in those instances, a child might be coming from a super highly preferred activity, playground, YouTube, and then they're going to a super non-preferred task, nap or potty. So sometimes what you might want to do is do like a moderately preferred task instead. So it might be like, okay, you're coming in from the playground and you have to go right to nap, but maybe it's coming from the playground, sit down and read a book or do a puzzle. So it's not aversive, but it's like neutral. And then we're going to do nap time. Or planning ahead from like you stop YouTube 2 minutes earlier before the potty timer goes off, then you guys sit and read a book and then you go to the potty. So then it's not like this giant shift and like super highly preferred to super non-preferred. It's that sort of in between, and you're sort of setting yourself up and stepping down. And again, I would definitely recommend that for things like if you're if your child has a hard time leaving YouTube or their iPad to do work, again, like building in that sort of step down procedure when you're presenting online coursework. And then thinking about too is then like let's say they love their iPad and they have to get on their Google Meet with their teacher at 10. So maybe at 9:45, you guys take away the iPad, but he gets to do Legos, which is preferred, or maybe it's just even like watching a show versus playing YouTube. Sometimes there are differential reinforcing pieces to that. And then at 10, you set a timer, and at 9:59, you guys log on to your laptop and you get things started, and then he gets YouTube right after. So then again, that is super reinforcing. He gets it right after completing that potentially least reinforcing or most aversive task. That's it for antecedent management. So I don't know if there's any more questions there before we get into a few consequences.
Oh, lots of great questions. Would you collect data on the identified behavior, time of day, antecedent, and number of occurrences as you prepare to address it with antecedent management strategies? If so, how long should data be collected? Over a week, by the day?
That's a great question. So what we do as behavior analysts, we love our data. So I would say like from like a clinical standpoint, I mean, generally, like if I come in to a school or to a home, we get like a good picture of like what's happening. I might try and observe some instances of that, taking some ABC data on like the parent might say like, whenever I present this, then the child does this. And so I might get a good picture of that. Again, an interview is not an assessment. So I do want to actually observe the behaviors. However, and so you might take data across the day, a couple of days, to get sort of a good picture of that and kind of what the potential function is. But if based on your description, of the behavior, and if I have a chance to observe it during an assessment, I might give you those recommendations, like just start doing this today. It might mess up my baseline data for my treatment plan, but if it helps you and it helps your child today, I'd rather you do that rather than not wasting time, but getting that data for my beautiful treatment plan. I'm not doing research, it's real life. So honestly, like if you, any of these antecedent management strategies that I mentioned, I mean, I would say you could do those today, and most of them, extra breaks, especially if the break is access to mom or a preferred tangible, even if the behavior isn't escape maintained, like that's still reinforcement. That's still a good antecedent management strategy. So all of these antecedent management strategies, there are some that are more specific to particular functions of behavior, but it's not gonna, it's just you're enriching the environment. You're making things better for the child, which in turn makes things better for you. So I wouldn't say like necessarily for any antecedent management strategies, you would have to get any baseline data. I definitely would recommend getting baseline data and kind of initial understanding of the hypothesized function before we get into more of the consequences.
And I'm going to combine these two other questions that involve kids who really thrive on routine. So I guess to the extreme, and especially now when parents are trying to work at hame, juggle the online learning, trying to focus on meals and bedtimes, and for who are very rigid with needing and the routine and not having difficulty with flexibility. Any suggestions there?
I think that's a great question, and as a working parent, with 2 kids, I definitely in many ways I say I'm telling you use routines, and I'm telling you that my kids went to bed way too late last night and were up way too early playing Xbox this morning. So I totally understand. And it's hard because we're just trying to get in when we can. And if you've seen that meme, it's like, working 9 to 5, but it's really like 9:10 to 9:20. And then it's like 10 to 10:15, we're like getting it in, and we're doing laundry, and we're, trying to get outside at least once a day just to breathe fresh air.
And you're all doing a great job.
So
congratulate yourselves. It's a lot.
So I understand. And I think really just from a personal, I think setting those routines for ourselves and expectations as working parents is also going to be, or non-working, just because even if you didn't work and you were, if you were a stay-at-home parent as well, or you were not, again, I'm not saying it's not work at all, because my husband did it for quite a while. If that is the case too, again, this is disrupting your previous routine. Maybe you were home with a younger kid and now you have your older kid that needs a lot of attention at home. And so that's disrupted your routine, even if you're not working outside the home. So I think trying to set those routines and those clear expectations as a family is going to be really helpful. Of I'm going to start email at 7 and then I'm going to come down. So setting those routines for yourself and knowing that you can't conquer the world and you're not going to get everything done that your boss probably wants you to get done. And knowing this is kind of setting those on and off times for your work, and working with your support system in your home of this is what needs to happen. And this is how it's going to work, and it might be that's going to change, and it might be on Tuesdays you do this, and then on Wednesdays you flex 3 hours in the middle of the day so your son can do his online learning. And I know some of us are lucky to have jobs that we can do that, and some of it it's harder, but I think setting those routines and schedules for ourselves too, because again, your son, that your meeting runs late, right? And so then therefore you're not there to get your son on his Zoom at 3, and because he's so routine based, he needs to be there, and he's going to be upset, and there's going to be a breakdown because of that. I could totally see that happening. And so because they thrive on the routine, and then our jobs are interrupting their routine, and it's just could be hard. So I think the best you can do is prepare. If you know something's going to run late, let them know. Knowing that again, they have to learn, and we all have to learn. It's not going to go as planned. And I think Fortunately, in some ways, this is kind of a trial by fire for some of our kids too, as far as like a lot of our kids have a hard time with changes in routine or being flexible or knowing that, you know, you might not make it to the Zoom, but the teacher's recording it, or, you know, you can do this tomorrow and it'll probably be okay if it's late, because it will be okay. But I think it's hard. And I think a lot of it is we need to work on strategies to help, and it's increasing tolerance to flexibility. And if they show any sliver of being okay with it, I would reinforce the heck out of it. Yeah, I'm so proud of you.
Especially
Nice
now.
job. Like, even if it's like maybe they only just huff and puff about it, which maybe you don't love, but it's better than a full blown tantrum or verbal threats. Like, that's better. So you're using what we call shaping, and at that point, and you're, you know, reinforcing those smaller steps towards the goal. It's hard. Like, I don't know if there's like an answer right now, because I feel like routines and schedules are changing daily, like even from evening. So I don't know when there's going to be Zoom meets. I don't know if it's going to be math or reading. And that's hard. That's hard for all of us. And again, I props to the teachers that are doing this and setting those up too. So I think that this new normal, or this temporary normal, is hard. And just know, and I kind of get into this later, but, you know, give yourself some slack. And I think really understand that we're all trying our very, very best. So I don't think that answers the question, but
Yeah. No, I think that's good. Well, why don't we continue, and then we'll do some questions. Yeah.
So consequences. These are, again, what we do to reduce the probability, well, that the challenging behaviors will occur again. So we want to look at what's the consequences of what's happening afterwards. Again, we really want to use these in conjunction with the instead of antecedent strategies, as well as those teaching procedures to increase those appropriate behaviors. And again, that's something you're going to work with your behavior analyst, your teacher, your speech therapist, to identify, like, if it's asking for a break, or, you know, increasing their general communication overall, or tolerating changes, tolerating being told no. Those are all strategies that we work on. We could do whole other presentations on those. They definitely, consequences should be planned ahead of time and definitely need to be consistent. So if you've decided that you're going to use timeout, then it should be consistent. It shouldn't be every third time or every fifth time. So if you're going to commit to something, you should really commit to it. Again, you can preview those as rules. You know, if you throw your toys, I'm going to have you have to clean them up. You know, so again, kind of preventing those, or, you know, letting that child know that that's going to be the consequence. If you hit, you will go to your room. So things like that. And again, depending on the verbal skills, but if that's something that they can understand, it's might be helpful to preview that as like a rule or a clear expectation. I kind of threw this in here, but definitely making sure that you are using reinforcement. So again, if when the child is doing what you want them to do, give them what they want. So if they want attention and they ask nicely, they tap you on the shoulder, do your best to tell them, yes, honey, what can I get you? Or here's the cookie. I know it's almost dinner time, but you asked me, so here, have half a cookie. If they do ask for a break appropriately, give them escape from that break, that task briefly. Like, so you want to reinforce those and increase those as they're fluent, their go-to response. So if 90% of the time your child is engaging in problem behavior and 10% of the time they are engaging in that appropriate behavior, I would reinforce those appropriate behaviors every single time, because you really want to increase that as their sort of like go-to default response. And again, whole presentation of reinforcement. So this kind of comes back to the potty example from the beginning. So we've got extinction is one way to stop your as a consequence. So we're not that when we use extinction, you stop reinforcing the challenging behavior with that functional reinforcer, and then you are only providing reinforcement for the appropriate or replacement behavior. So in the case of the potty, if you determine that maybe the tantrum is escape from toilet training, you're going to teach an appropriate replacement behavior, which might mean break. It might be the sign for all done. It could be anything like that. You are going to teach that appropriate replacement behavior. you will reinforce the appropriate response of like signing all done as soon as they prompt them to the potty. And if they engage in tantrum, you are not reinforcing that with escape. You will ignore. Ignoring is hard. As the slide says, ignoring is hard. I think a really important key to extinction and ignoring, you are ignoring the behavior. You're not ignoring the child. You're just not reinforcing the behavior. It's keeping that neutral face and voice tone, which, you know, I'm sure you guys have all seen the people that come in and work with your kids. We're really good at because we get to go home and we're not dealing with it the rest of the day and the night and the next day. Again, I have a great neutral face with my clients, but using it at home can be hard. Continuing to redirect the child to what they should be doing. We are going potty. It's time to go potty. You're not saying don't do that. You're not saying stop crying. You're not saying stop screaming. You're not saying like all those different things. And you're not leaving the child alone. You're not ignoring the child. You're not attending to or reinforcing the maladaptive behavior. That would be like the one important thing I would say is like, as far as thinking about consequences, is when someone tells you to ignore it, you're not just ignoring the child. You're just ignoring that maladaptive behavior. And then I know that we talked a little bit about, you know, timeout. So timeout can be effective if it's used for behaviors that are maintained by getting something. So if a behavior is maintained by getting attention, getting tangibles, getting the iPad, getting ice cream, timeout can be effective. Timeout is generally not effective if it is an escape maintained behavior. So if the child comes in, has to do the math homework and they don't want to, so they crumble it up and you put them in timeout, great, they didn't have to do their math homework. They are so happy. Same thing with like the potty. If they're engaging in tantrum to escape from the potty and you put them in timeout, then that is probably not going to decrease that behavior. There's, you know, again, there might be some sort of caveats to this in the sense of a break or like a time to calm down is probably necessary, especially if a child has already gotten to that tantrum behavior. That's different than a timeout. And the sort of the behavioral word of like conceptualization of a timeout. A timeout is removal of access to those reinforcers. So something that's maintained by attention, you could use timeout from attention. So if the you're playing with your son and you turn to talk to your husband and your son hits you, because he wants you to pay attention to him, you would then remove attention for that prescribed duration of time. They may have to sit so he can see you kind of talking to your husband and being like, yes, you know, I had a great day. How are you? And so he can see that, and it's sort of like a signal to attention is not available to you. But then once that prescribed time has passed, normal interaction with the child should resume. You shouldn't be residually like, do you know how you went to timeout? You did a good, you know, like there should be none of that. Just go back to normal. Again, this could be specific and you'd work with your team to kind of fine tune this, but that's kind of the behavioral of pieces of that timeout where there was no attention, you know, and then once they are calm or back or whatever that time has passed, you go back to normal. You may then start to prompt, like, how can you get mommy's attention? You can say, mommy, or you can tap me on the shoulder, or whatever, however they're communicating, but you wouldn't necessarily dwell on that. Like, don't hit mommy, you don't do that. Like, let's not do that, because that's a lot of attention. Same thing with access to tangibles. So if your two kids are sitting on the floor, one of them has the iPad, the other one hits the one with the iPad to get the iPad back, that the one that hits maybe sits in a specific location and has to watch his brother play iPad for X amount of time. And then he comes back, and then maybe you teach him to ask for the iPad or ask for a turn or ask him, can I watch with you, and things like that. I would not necessarily give him the iPad right after timeout, because then essentially that's sort of reinforcing that chain of behaviors, but you want to teach him something new. But those are times when that consequence of a timeout from tangible may be appropriate. Again, you're tying that in and you're teaching it with those replacement behaviors of using communication, of teaching toleration of waiting, right? Because that's a hard one. Waiting is hard. And what that looks like is not asking mommy, 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 it's my turn, is it my turn, is it my turn? When can you play with me? When can you play with me? There's probably defining what waiting appropriately looks like. But some of that is going to take teaching, and some of that's going to take teaching that might disrupt our routine temporarily so that we can then get to that ultimate point of appropriate waiting. I only just have this like 2 slides, and then we can do a lot more questions. Again, I just really wanted to say, just like, this is, unprecedented. There is no normal. It's really hard. It's hard for our kids. Again, this balance is just hard no matter what. Paired with any sort of maladaptive behaviors, if it's screaming, if it's yelling, if it's tantrums, if it's self-injury, like that just makes it exponentially more difficult. So really, again, take care of yourself. Give yourself a break. Again, I know some of this is like, you probably hear this, but again, I want to be someone else that's saying this. Be flexible with your expectations. Again, like I said, you may not get all the work done for your child, or, you may not, things may not happen the way that you're expecting. Using routines and schedules, changing those routines and schedules, figuring out what's going to work best. I think setting those reasonable expectations for yourself and your child, again, and communicating with your team of, is it, I need to talk to the teacher, and we can only make 3 Zooms a week. I can't come every day. It's just not going to work. It's hard for my son. He doesn't like it. But maybe on the days he's going to do it, that's going to be my commitment. A lot of antecedent management strategies, know that you're doing your best, and know that it's hard for everyone, even if they're not saying it, or they're not, communicating in a way that we all can understand, that they're most likely there's something. So, go ahead. I'll switch to my Q&A slide so we can ask more questions.
Oh, we got lots of good questions. Okay. And I just want to echo what Kathy said. Just please give yourself a break. I mean, I think the best analogy I heard is, like you're on the airplane, when we could be on airplanes, and, you put on your own oxygen mask first before assisting your child. And you really need to take care of yourselves. So, and give yourself some credit and some space. So it's tough. It's tough. All right. Some good questions. What can we do with normal teenage behaviors, such as defiance, head-butting with parents, etc., when there are a few proactive strategies they respond to, such as they're in quarantine, can't see any friends, they're medically fragile, so cannot get carry out, etc.?
Oh, man. That's hard, I think, because, setting up contingencies, it's going to have to be pretty long term, right? It's like, not you're good this week, you can go out on Friday night. It's going to have to be like, you're good for the rest of quarantine, and then you can go out in 6 months. And I think that's really hard, because you have to be creative, I think, too, in your reinforcement. And again, I don't want anyone breaking the bank, so I hate saying like, pay them for being good, because, normally you wouldn't have to. I think, and again, it's going to depend on your child, sort of their level of that, but, setting up, working with them or their peers, families, to do like a Minecraft play date or a Zoom. And it's hard because I've missed about 50 calls from one of my son's friends' moms, because just life. But, if you can set up something or figure out what they might do might be interested in doing, that potentially is reinforcing in the context of now. Again, if it's setting up that routine and schedule, setting up maybe a contract between the two of you guys, of, I'm gonna, do this, and then you can do that, and then, we're gonna meet in the middle of, I think screen time is hard for all of us. Screen time for all of my kids has gone up through the roof. And so I think, if it's earning screen time or participating in chores, creating, chore charts and menus, I think anything there. I think teens are tricky no matter what. And I think this has just been really, really hard for those kids that can't go out, and things like that. So just really, trying your best to communicate with them. If there's someone else they could talk to as well, to kind of vent their questions and concerns. But I think if they have any way to set up potential social contact, even just short amounts, I wouldn't say like an hour-long play date on Zoom is good, but even just like a 15-minute, FaceTime or something with someone they might know.
Okay. All right, good. What impact does ignoring undesirable behaviors have on individuals? Does it communicate this behavior is not acceptable to engage? This is for a young adult. And also a similar question about doing chores. I was told not to say thank you or praise the child when they're doing chores they're expected to do. This will give them the idea they don't need to finish, or at least wait to praise or say thank you after they've done the chores. It's almost like we need to be skillful in approaching praise.
Okay, those are both great questions. I'll do the ignore one first. So by ignoring, you are withholding reinforcement for the problem behavior. So if a child engages in a tantrum to get attention and you are not providing attention, you are not reinforcing that behavior. So you're not punishing it, but you are not reinforcing it. So the absence of that reinforcement and they're not getting what they want, it means that they're less likely to engage in that behavior again the next time they want attention. So think about vending machine. So you put a quarter in and you press the button and your Diet Coke does not come out. So your behavior was not reinforced. You're less likely to use that vending machine again because you're like, that's the bad vending machine. You might try a different vending machine. But if every time this is the consistent vending machine, I put my quarter in, I push my money, push the thing, the Diet Coke comes out, my behavior is being reinforced. When you ignore the behavior and put that behavior on extinction, they are less likely to engage in that behavior because it is not being reinforced. The important piece with that extinction is that you're also teaching the replacement behavior, because what might happen is instead of the tantrum or they're crying on the floor, now they start aggressing on you. So they might try something else, which might be worse. So you really always need to pair that ignoring and that extinction with teaching something appropriate. Otherwise, you just might be setting yourself up for something you can't ignore. Going to the second question of chores. I think that's a great question. And I think, again, it's going to really depend on where your child is at in the learning process and what sort of how they've been taught, what the expectation has been up to this point. And I think it's true. You don't want to be saying, good job, thanks, nice work, throughout like a whole sweeping thing. Because that, that breaks the chain. There's a lot behaviorally there. But if someone does a chore and maybe they are expected to do it, it's part of their routine, it would still be nice to say thank you occasionally, maybe not consistently. So maybe you thin that reinforcement. You think about the person that you live with, if they do the dishes, even though that might be their job, or you guys alternate saying thank you will probably reinforce that behavior, and maybe they'll do it again the next night. So it's being expected. It's part of our adult responsibilities. But if someone does my laundry for me, I'm going to say thanks, because that was really nice of you. And maybe I'll do it for them next time. So again, I think that it's kind of, again, you have to be planful about reinforcement, because you don't want it to interrupt something. You don't want it to control their behavior. But again, when someone's learning something, or in this pandemic, when we're all edgy and stressed and not getting enough social interaction or attention anyways, you may just have to use more now just to kind of keep that going and to maintain that behavior given these unprecedented times.
Okay, great, thank you. Along the same lines with the work question, trying to escape work, how about some prevention strategies?
For work. Okay, so I think,
Avoidance.
schedules, clear expectations. So things like, Johnny, today we have math and social studies on your docket. One thing that I find really helpful is choice. Do you want to do math first or social studies first? Giving some choice in like what the work is going to be. Do you want to do the laundry first or the dishes first? I don't care, as long as they both get done. Or if you can even plan it out longer, if your child understands that, do you want to do math today and social studies tomorrow, or do you want to do social studies today and math tomorrow? So having some choice, control can be very reinforcing. But setting up that schedule, saying we're going to start at 10 o'clock, we're going to do, one assignment, then you can take a break, and then another assignment, and then you can take a break, and then you're done until 2. And so that making it clear, setting those expectations, giving control, using visuals. I mean, I have a sticky note that I wrote all my son's homework on, and then as we do it, I cross it off, and I'm like, do you want to do this or this? As long as it gets done, I don't particularly care what order he does it in, as long as we get all of his work done. So I think those are some good strategies for escape, and then giving giving extra breaks too. If it's a multi-part assignment, setting it up so that after each section of the assignment, he can take a quick break, building in extra reinforcers. Edibles are not necessarily always ethically needed, but sometimes we all need a little snack. So pairing that work with something more pleasant. So might be helpful.
2 questions, somewhat related. I'm going to roll them in together about meltdowns. One is my kid's 5 years old with social emotional developmental delays and wants everything now. I sometimes break his routine on purpose just to exercise flexibility. That backfires so often that I'm exhausted and end up trying to avoid it. The end result, we're back to square one. And then the other is, again, what about meltdowns and intervening, trying to make the child feel better, sometimes makes the situation worse. I know we should make sure they're safe, so sort of related.
Those are great questions too. So kind of touching on the first one, flexibility, routines, rigidity. That's really hard. I, as a behavior analyst, we work a lot on that. There's actually a ton of research on that. And just very it's a really important topic. A lot of that is got to be very systematic. So it sounds like you're trying, which is awesome. As far as, working towards understanding that first step of understanding that this is creating that this is hard and it's not okay, because when this continues, it's not feasible or sustainable. And knowing that that's, going to impact your child's development, social, emotional, all that stuff. So essentially the big picture is we need to, again, understand the function. What's that control? And control is another function that a lot of people will talk about, is I engage in challenging behaviors to exercise control over my environment. So a lot of times, again, it comes back to teaching that communication, of teaching how to get that control, and teaching an actual request or command in the behavioral jargon of I'm gonna, I want control, or it's my way, or something like that. And then actually systematically programming and monitoring your data to ensure that that request is taught and is fluent, that we're all reinforcing it, which is hard because a lot of times, but again, there's treatment packages for this. And then looking at how you're then fading that. And really a lot of this, and you want to be working with a behavior analyst and sort of how do you fade that in a systematic way to a point that it's maintainable in the natural environment. So it's not, I can't necessarily give you an exact answer. You're on the right path. It's just that you may want to talk to a behavior analyst and kind of work with a team, because again, what you might be seeing now is this intermittent reinforcement, and that every time your child isn't successful, that's hard for you, and then you're back to square one. It's exhausting. So we want to set up a way and a teaching package that could help you really make it work in a way that's sustainable for you and your child, that's going to be naturally maintainable in the natural environment. Because it can be a lot of hard work, as far as specifically with things related to rigidity, repetitive behaviors, and things like that, where you try to not reinforce that every time, but that does lead to some potentially very, very challenging and unsafe behaviors that can be exhausting for everyone. So I would really say I have our contact info at the end, and definitely if you wanted to talk more about that, we can, our admin team can help. But
And I did put your email there in the chat too, so we want to make sure we get that. We have one question here, and we're getting to the end of the time. I do want one though, because it speaks directly to distance learning, which I know a lot of you are struggling with right now. My 5-year-old son sat for distance learning for about half the time of his class. He walked away from his computer twice, but he managed to return and sat in front of the computer. He did not participate as much as I would have liked him to, but I cheered him on for the time he sat in front of the computer. Should I have done more with trying to address the time that he walked away from the computer? Should there have been a consequence for this instead of disregarding it? I want him to be able to sit in front of the computer and participate in his class.
I would say, just not knowing a lot about like the actual duration, kind of, what kindergarten distance learning is looking like, I would say that you did the right thing. I think cheering him on and providing extra attention and reinforcement for sitting, I think is really the best and really like ideal. I would say again, if it's just been that one time, I would also kind of like keep track of that, like take some data on today. He, out of a 20-minute class, he was 5 minutes there, 2 minutes away, 5 minutes there, 2 minutes away, whatever the rest is there. And take your data, because people are really bad at remembering things. We remember what we want to remember, and we kind of remember it in our own interpretive way. Data that you write down, taking actual duration, taking actual like success, is going to actually be helpful. And you'll, because the days run together. Honestly, print a calendar from your computer, or like write it on your desk calendar, just like how long he sat each day. And just knowing that, I would start with just those antecedents, just like setting up that, lots of reinforcement, setting up those expectations. Johnny, today we're going to do a 20-minute meet with Miss Brown. What are we going to do after? And then if he's there, you're sitting with him. It's a lot of attention. If he walks away, maybe a quick verbal, but you stay there. And then maybe it's like a neutral redirect. I wouldn't really have any sort of like consequences as far as just like redirecting. So essentially you're ignoring the elopement, ignoring him walking away, and you're just, hey, look, we're doing that. Part of that might be related to communicating with the teacher of like, Johnny can only really last for 5 minutes. Maybe every 5 minutes you can do a Go Noodle song. And so they're bouncing around, and maybe he needs that movement, or he wants to walk around. Or they can do something like a scavenger hunt where they go grab something from across the room and bring something to show to his friends. Again, 5-year-old is kindergarten, so kind of that would work. Would be different in like a high school math class. But again, I think really like what you did sounded perfect. Extra reinforcement, extra attention, and then taking some data so you can see like he is getting better. His endurance and his ability to attend is longer, but you might reach a max. I mean, honestly, that's why we're stopping at an hour and a half, because I know we're all probably getting antsy and need to pee or have a drink of water or coffee. So I think that is it's great. And I think, again, this is all new. We don't know like what is a normal 5-year-old expectation for distance learning for anyone, typical or on the spectrum. Like, I think we might get some really good data out of this pandemic in the long run.
Yeah. Great. We're getting some great feedback in the chat too, Kathy. I want to make sure you get your information up about verbal beginnings. I also put email into the chat. I want to thank Cathy Judkins for being with us today, and all the great, very, very detailed information. And also a thanks to the folks at Verbal Beginnings and our friends at Pathfinders for Autism. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. The Autism Society is trying to help our community in every way possible. So please reach out to us with your ideas. We have lots of things that are online. A webinar coming up on SSDI on the 20th. We're going to have a special education with Disability Rights Maryland coming up. Our support groups are online. We did bingo last Friday, and we'll be doing that again. So we welcome your good ideas, and please reach out if we can help you in any way. And Kathy, thank you so much. Everybody, just do a visual thank you, everybody. Thank you, guys. Take care of yourselves, and Have a good rest of your day.